Right. Good day, everyone, and happy Monday. I feel like I'm missing my theme music, but we're going to be okay today. Thank you for showing up today for this session. We know it's Monday and it's so many other things going on, and you could be so many other places, but you decided to be here with us today, and we are grateful. Welcome to our session on racism and youth mental health and taking action. So this is our disclaimer. Essentially, the information that we will share with you today are presented by myself and also my phenomenal co-host, Dr. Henrika McCoy. This information is not supported or endorsed by SAMHSA or the Department of Health and Human Services or any other organization. This is our session security. In the event that we have any security issues or anything occurs with this today, which we do not anticipate, we will close out this session and we will send a follow-up email with a separate Zoom link. Here are Intact partners. We partner with various organizations. Our goal is to make sure that we provide a variety of perspectives and that our topics range throughout the age range for children, youth, young adults, and their families. We encourage you to take a look at our website to learn more about Intact, subscribe to our newsletter if you're not already subscribed. And also you can go there to take a look at and find out more information about our various providers. Our vision and our services. So our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive system of care. This will contains the ways in which we do that. We provide individual consultation, group consultation. We also facilitate communities of practice. We send out resources. You may have seen some of our newsletters. So in addition to this webinar and in this series, we also provide these services as well. So at the end of this session, if you're interested in learning more about our technical assistance services, you can go to our website to request more information and also request a contact follow-up regarding our technical assistance. So some commonly asked questions. So after this session, you will receive a link to the recording. You will also receive a certificate of completion and the slide deck. And if you do not receive that, please check your spam, please check your junk mail. And if you have not received it by the middle of this week, please reach out to us and we can follow up with you. So again, welcome to today's session, Racism and Youth Mental Health. My name is Dr. Tanisha Freeman Foster. I serve as the Director of Equitable Practices and Products at Intact and also at Change Matrix. And I'll allow my fabulous and phenomenal co-presenter, Dr. Henrika McCoy, to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, I guess, depending on where people are. I'm Henrika McCoy, and I'm currently an associate professor and the Ruby Lee Peaster Centennial Fellow in Services to Children and Families at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin. And I am thrilled to be here today and to talk about this topic. We're both really passionate about this. So I'm looking forward to us sharing just some information and then hearing what you come up with in your own breakout groups and then come back and share with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. McCoy. So anytime we have conversations that require us to be vulnerable, that require us to bring our authentic self, which is mostly all of our conversations, we like to ground ourselves in some commitments. And so on our behalf, we will make sure that this space is affirming, respectful, recovery-oriented in all activities, and that our language is strength-based and hopeful, inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences. They're healing-centered and trauma-responsive. And we invite each of you to join in your journey. Wherever you are, we know that individuals as human beings, we're just in different places in our journeys based on our experiences, based on our life. And so we want to invite you to come in, and no matter where you are, we believe that it's important that we're able to share because we can learn from each other. Also, we want to make sure that we're using person-first language that is free of labels. that we are making sure that we are not judgmental and avoiding assumptions. And instead of assuming, asking curious questions about things that may be unfamiliar to us. Also, we want to make sure that our language is respectful, clear, and understandable. And last but not least, that our language is consistent with our actions, policies, and products. So we're not here saying we believe in strategies and ways to improve our services to youth and young adults and then go back to our organization and continue with business as usual. But we're taking time to really interrogate how we're showing up and the policies and the processes that we're implementing in our work and how they may be harmful to youth, young adults, and their families, and actually taking action and doing something about it. And that may be within our role, it may be within our team or within our organization as a whole, but really taking action on it. All right, and so now that we have introduced ourselves, we would like to get to know you a little more. We'd like to know who's in the room. So if you could share your name, your location with land acknowledgement, your organizational role, and just tell us a little bit about why you are attending this session. And I will share my land acknowledgement. I am located in Tampa Bay, Florida, and it is the land of the Seminole people. And I'm excited to share this space with you all today. I'm looking forward to not only us sharing our expertise and knowledge, but also learning from you and helping you navigate your workplaces as well. So we will pause here for a second. All right, thank you all for continuing to share. So this is an overview of our agenda. So our agenda for today, we just introduced ourselves and we're hearing from you all and getting a better understanding of who's in the room. And again, thank you for being here with us today. And then we'll move into interrogating our past and our present. So we can't know where we're going until we know where we've been. And we interrogate how our past is showing up in our present, and also what things from our past should we be bringing along that are good and that help us to move this work forward, and what things may be harmful and oppressive and filled with racism that we need to interrogate and remove because it's harming and oppressing individuals. We'll also discuss the impact of racial disparities and the impact of it on mental health. We'll have a small group activity using scenario-based learning. And then we'll talk about the power of our thoughts, words, and actions. Then we'll proceed with a few action steps. And then I'm so excited to introduce our special opportunity, the opportunity to continue this conversation and to continue taking action on this topic. So we'll introduce that, we'll have our Q&A, and then we'll close out for today. All right, so moving into interrogating our past and present, and I will turn this over to you, Dr. McCoy.
Thank you so much. So as we have heard, it's really important, right, to understand where we've been and where we're going. And so these examples that we're about to look at might seem a little far-fetched, but I think it's really important that we think about this issue in the larger context of our society. So the first example that I want to address, and some of you may recall this, is during Hurricane Katrina. And I picked this because this was such a big, I think, notable news event. You know, of course, Hurricane Katrina was devastating. I'm originally from Chicago. I was actually in St. Louis when this happened, but, you know, down here in Texas, people were a lot closer. And of course, if you were in Louisiana. But this particular incident was that we saw news coverage really showing disparaging looks at how Black people were treated and those who were not Black. And so this was all over the news. You showed a young Black person who was in water, clearly impacted by the hurricane. We see that there is, you know, please help us, there's someone there. And this person was accused of looting when trying to find goods. But then we saw that there was news coverage for white individuals, and it was that they were finding. And the reporter who reported this gave an excuse that, you know, he saw them doing it, he didn't see them going in and taking. But this example just reflects how the characterization of Black individuals in our country can be so different, even in times of dire straits, even in times when people are suffering, when people need something. that we can't even see past race, really, even if it's embedded in our perceptions, to look at the need that people have, and we characterize them in another way. Fast forward from there, and a few years later, we are, as we're about to embark on a new presidential, I heard today that President Biden is about to announce again that he's running. And if we think back to the election when President Obama ran against the next president, Donald Trump, and this was the characterization of President Obama and his wife, Michelle, on the cover of the New Yorker. And I don't know if people remember this, but this was certainly controversial. Again, I'm from Chicago, so of course for us, it was really big news. It made all the papers and the news stations repeatedly about the characterization of him. If you look really closely, if you don't remember this picture, you didn't pay that much attention then, you can see, you've got the fist bump, which then was considered, people talked about that as a gang sign. Now you see it everywhere in every TV show possible. You see the American flag burning in the fireplace. You see Osama bin Laden on the wall. You see here that Michelle Obama was accused of saying, "Kill Whitey," et cetera. And this characterization really was rife with just so many stereotypes and biases and negativity about someone who became president, and really who became president without any sort of negative portrayal of him as a person and his wife in terms of anything with kind of true negativity. You look to the right and you see this is the same cartoonist. I thought it was important to highlight that this exact same individual 8 years later characterized Donald Trump, and despite all of the things that he had surrounding him negatively, and if you think about now, he was known for denying housing to Black tenants. He had been repeatedly accused of not paying his workers, repeatedly accused of hiring those individuals who were undocumented and taking advantage of them, affairs, et cetera, et cetera. And the only thing that this reporter said he thought was problematic was that his misogyny might be his Achilles heel. And so when you think about a person who came to office with no scandal and a person who came to office with significant scandal, yet the characterization of both really, if you look, is reflective of the racism that we see that's just so embedded in our country. Fast forward to just a few weeks ago, I don't know how many people are sports fans, but I don't think you had to be a sports fan to see this news story where Caitlin Clark, who played for Iowa, they went against LSU in the finals. And Caitlin Clark, who in previous, was well known for being one of the top, if not the top for some people, basketball players, and repeatedly kind of waved her hand in front of people. I'm not a wrestling fan, but this was apparently something that John Cena did to point out to his opponents that he was, the person to beat, et cetera. And this news story did not make, when she did this all season, it didn't matter. However, when Angel Reese did it, she was accused of having no class, of not being a good sportsman, et cetera, et cetera. And she pointed out that this was something that someone else had done who looked very different than her, and it didn't matter. The news reporter, Jose de Jesus Ortiz, said that win with class, lose with class, play with class, and that Clark's mom and dad could be proud that her daughter ignored the taunting and they raised her right, with the implication that Angel Reese was not raised right, and ignoring the fact that Angel Reese had done the exact same thing. And when challenged, she went on to try to find an excuse about, well, she taunted her, she went to the bench, et cetera, et cetera. And you might have a personal opinion about what you think sportsmanlike behavior should be, but the fact is these two young women did the same thing, yet their characterization in the news was extraordinarily different, to the point that Caitlin Clark even noted herself that Angel Reese didn't do anything any different than she did. So I use these examples to point out how we really have a different narrative for people in our society, particularly young Black people and young white people, and how that really characterizes what we often see in mental health treatment, diagnosing, access. So I have a quote that I use often in presentations. There's often, people don't want to be called racist. There's definitions about what is racism, et cetera. And although I don't think this definition encompasses everything, I think it's one of the most useful, particularly for this kind of conversation. Racism refers not only to overt, intentionally discriminatory actions and attitudes, but also to deep-seated societal structures that, even without intent to discriminate, systematically constrain some individuals' opportunities and resources on the basis of their race or ethnic group. It's important here to understand that intent is not required. So people often say, I didn't mean to, I'm not racist. It's not about intent. It's about what happens. It's about the power and ability to engage in behavior that negatively impacts someone. It's about the ability to enact your prejudices against someone that prevents them from having access to equitable solutions, equitable treatment, equitable, et cetera. So how does that play out in terms of disparities in mental health? So when we think about the impact of racial disparities in mental health, it's important that we also go even farther back and think about historically. So as we know, this is a country where Blacks were brought to this country involuntarily, despite what people would like to change the narrative about. We were not immigrants, we were not natives, we were brought here unwillingly. And we were people who were enslaved. There were some who were not, but the majority were enslaved. There were very few who were not, and those some managed to become ultimately not enslaved. But to keep people in enslavement, not only were there the police, who really have their origins, if people understand, in slave patrols, but also psychiatry, mental health were always embedded and invested in keeping Black people enslaved, to the point that drapetomania was considered a psychiatric diagnosis, and it was used to justify enslavement and how Blacks were treated. According to Sam Cartwright, it was a disease that caused Negroes to run away. So if people who were enslaved realized and were able to leave, it was considered a psychiatric issue that they didn't have enough common sense and mental health capacity to understand they should remain enslaved. We move forward to pre-Civil War, and psychiatrists said there were, comparatively speaking, fewer Negro lunatics following their sudden emancipation. The number of insane began to multiply. So once again, trying to justify enslavement and saying that only when enslaved were Black people really not crazy. They were not lunatics. They were only within their right mind during enslavement. In the 1970s, we saw tremendous levels of psychiatrists frequently diagnosing Black men with schizophrenia and describing them as agitated and aggressive. This continues to this day in terms of how we characterize the behavior. And it might often be that instead of depression or other issues, it's conduct disorder, anything that really taps into a negative behavior that then criminalizes what people are experiencing, where they need mental health responses. And then according to Sapshin, Diesenhaus, and Wilkerson, the racism in general society was really mirrored in psychiatry. Black psychiatric patients were classified as hostile and not motivated for treatment, having primitive character structure, not psychologically minded and impulse ridden. So finding a way to keep Black people enslaved in terms of our large society, even if not with shackles, certainly with preventing access to care, access to services, and finding ways to criminalize needs. You know, the not having motivation for treatment is not having access to treatment. You can't be motivated to get something you don't have access to. But somehow that was not an important thing to note. It was that there's a lack of motivation for treatment. So how does this play out currently? You know, when we think about racial disparities and we think about those systemic impacts, next slide, please. We have to think about really access to treatment. We know that when we live in our society that getting services, even if you have insurance, is challenging. I was just talking to a friend earlier. I just moved to Texas not too long ago, and I need to have medical care. And there's a shortage of medical care, apparently, even with insurance. I have really good insurance. So let's just imagine what it must be like to be someone who doesn't have insurance, who needs access to care, and then particularly access to mental health care. That is a challenge. If you're African-American male in particular, and we think about our current society, I mean, we've had repeated shootings and killings of Black men and Black women, right? Young men and young women who do simple things like ring someone's doorbell. So there's automatically this bias and perception of who young Black men, young Black women are, and that ultimately when they come into a system that they are violent, they're untreatable, they don't need services. We know that they're often misdiagnosed and not diagnosed. Part of what led me into the work I do now as a clinician many years ago, and I was starting out and I would see young Black men who were being diagnosed with conduct disorder and who were getting involved in the juvenile legal system. And I looked at them and thought, those young men are depressed. But there was not representation of people that looked like me. There were not people that understood the cultural examination of how you think about what those issues are and how there's a difference in how people explain, how people engage when they have mental health services. And we see that particularly for young Black men who are much more engaged in the juvenile legal system. There's a much higher disproportionate rate of them across systems. So they're more likely to be referred to courts instead of to psychiatric services. We know that ultimately then that increases the involvement in the criminal justice system and long-term into recidivism and incarceration if those services and mental health needs go unmet. So this is a graphic that really shows, right, this circular experience of the legal system, special education, child welfare. Those are all systems where young Black individuals, males and females, and those who are non-binary are overrepresented. We know that there's a cycle. I have done child welfare, I've done special ed, I've worked in the juvenile legal system, and so many times youth are involved across those systems, right? They go from one to the other to the other. And part of what's problematic is that those systems never talk to each other. So a youth may have had someone who was great in one system and someone identified what was going on, but in the next system, those records don't follow. The workers never talk and they're starting all over again. Then in that system, they get someone who maybe is not as on top of it, so they fall between the cracks. Then they up in the next system and now they've had contact with the police or with someone else that then criminalizes those behaviors that were identified perhaps early on, but there was no response to. So we know that there's not a systematic approach. We know that systems don't talk to each other. And we also know that this has continued to be a problem because so often people who understand that are culturally responsive, that may look like youth that are in the system are not represented enough to be able to intervene, may not have the power to intervene because of their role in that system, and may not really just have access to be able to do that. And so finally, it's really important to think about what the larger consequences are about all of this, right? These are the youth that we see that we have contact with. We know that if you don't ultimately address these issues, it can lead to victimization as well as perpetration against someone else. We know that there can be long-term impact for young people that plays out into adulthood. And we know that as challenging as it is to get services as a young person, it can be even more challenging to get services as an adult. And the challenge with get services as an adult is that we are now seeing compounded issues. For young people, they're compounded often because of the multiple systems, the multiple changes, but if they go unmet, they worsen, they harden, they get more challenging. And so as an adult, it becomes even more challenging to find services and to get someone who really has the ability and wherewithal to navigate all those different layers and to find a system that will pay for that. It's hard enough to get 10 sessions, 12 sessions, but when you become adult and you may need 50 sessions, that can be even more impossible.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. So now we've talked a lot. We've talked about what this looks like in healthcare, what it looks like in current events, what it looks like in social media. And now we're going to come and we're going to ground it as what it looks like within our organization. So we're going to break you all into little small groups and we're going to go through a scenario. We'll put the scenario in the chat, but I'll start off with this. The scenario is DeAndre Greenworth is in the 6th grade at Gilson Middle School. He can often be found telling jokes and impersonating various teachers, making his classmates laugh. As a result, he has been sent out of class numerous times for being disruptive. DeAndre becomes upset when he is sent to the office because he doesn't understand why he is being sent out of class. Recently, due to arguing with Principal Tolliver, DeAndre received an in-school suspension for insubordination. During his most recent in-school suspension, DeAndre got in a fight with another student who was also in in-school suspension. The fight began after the student called DeAndre a racial slur and intentionally stepped on his foot. DeAndre asked the student to apologize, but he refused. Because DeAndre threw the first punch, he was sent to the office. Principal Tolliver then gave DeAndre 3 days of home suspension. So during the school's weekly faculty meeting, the story of the incident was shared. Multiple teachers expressed their concerns and fears about DeAndre. One teacher voiced his concerns that DeAndre has a greater propensity for violence because he lives in the Southside Davis neighborhood. The social worker stated that DeAndre was probably acting out because he already had 4 siblings and his mom recently had another baby. The group recommended DeAndre for the school's juvenile justice intervention program, anger management, and mental health services. So within your small group, We want you to think about that scenario. We want you to be present in your group, share your name, and identify someone to record highlights and report out to the larger group. And again, in your group, reread the scenario and look at the dialogue question. So we want you to think of this in terms of the entire scenario. What is occurring in this scenario? What trajectory is DeAndre headed for and why? And what is the immediate impact of the decision made by the faculty? And what is the long-term impact of this decision? And when we come back together as a group, we will look at this. And these are the only instructions that we're given for now, because a lot of times that's the instructions that we receive when we're working with youth and families, that here's their story and this is what happened. And so we're going to start here, and then throughout the remainder of our session, we'll look at the responses to this, and then we'll overlay it with a model that you can take back with you. So I will put that in the chat, and then Bridget will take us into our breakout rooms. Welcome back. We know
this meeting is being recorded.
Welcome back. If you're not on mute, please mute yourself. Awesome. So we know that time goes by really, really fast, and you could have discussed this scenario for a long time. And we underestimated the power of a Monday and the power of this topic and bringing so many awesome and phenomenal people together. But we just want to pause to find out what came up for you in your group. So if there's someone that is going to report for your group, please raise your hand and we'll try to get through as many people as we can. Please target to our hearts, to our head and not our heart if we don't get to you. And just stay tuned for future opportunities around this topic as well. So I see your hand raised. I'm going to call on Valerie. Valerie Travis.
Right. Okay, so our group talked about a few things. And the first thing that we talked about, we agreed that the kid is automatically labeled, right? So what we talked about is, why don't we just have a conversation, let the child educate him, let him know he might be funny, he might even be a clown in his neighborhood, he might be a leader in his class, but there's some boundaries you have to have in school. Let's have a good conversation. We might want to say, let's interview the parents, find out what's going on. Let's find out what his strengths are. Let's find out what he likes. When he was called a racial slur, we automatically want to put him in a category, and we put labels on kids, which we most of us agree we don't like labels. So what were the dynamics? What were the dynamics? He was called a racial name. One thing we thought, could he talk to a school advocate? Comedy can be a positive thing for him. Is he a leader in his own right? So I think one of the people in our group talked about, does he need mental health? Let me say this. This is what kids do all the time. It's up to us to direct them to the right place, use it as a positive tool, and not stunt his whole growth. We're trying to prepare him for a future here that could be a place where he can bloom and not necessarily have all the trouble and the things that goes along with being an African-American young male. So we talked about that. We talked about, it looks like they wanted to push him into the juvenile justice system automatically. And I'm just not down with that. Mm-hmm. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk to him. Let's give his strengths. Let's say, listen, dude, you might be a comedian. You might be the next Steve Harvey, but right in school, listen, you got to have some boundaries. And so we talked about those kind of things. So I don't like labels, and I don't think we should go into all that, does he need evaluation? Does he need an IEP? This is what kids do all the time, but they still need direction. It's up to us to follow them, give them direction, train them, teach them, and keep it moving.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, Valerie. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Right, so what we will do, just to be mindful of time too, as I call on you and you're reporting out for your group, if you build on something that the previous person did not touch on, just to save time. So I go to Natalie Gallagher.
Hello. So what our group talked about was how DeAndre was being talked at and not talked to, like how he didn't know why he was being sent to the office and he didn't really know why they were taking all these actions. And then also we talked about how like the trajectory that they're putting him on would lead him to mistrust the system because they didn't really talk with him through those decisions. They just made them for him. And we also talked about how their decision making is contributing to the school to prison pipeline and how that will also cause like mistrust.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Natalie. Next, I see on my screen, Ashley King Bratton. Uh-oh, you're on mute. It sounds really profound, but we can't hear it.
There we go. Hi. Sorry about that.
No worries.
To build on Valerie and Natalie, what they were just saying. So there was a big, we had a lot of discussion about the people who are in charge here. So especially if it was like a less diverse group of people, faculty, we also shared some experience that there needs to be someone to step forward and advocate for this young man, and who has there's definitely a lack of knowledge and lack of education around the impact of those words. And there's an definitely expected reaction. It could be a negative or positive, whichever way, but someone needs to be educated and culturally competent enough to kind of step forward. So we did talk about there should have been some type of implementation of de-escalation tactics or other interventions outside of the actual punishment, especially because like if he is just trying to express himself, this is his personality, he's now being punished for just being, himself, and also processing with him about how his behaviors are impacting the class and the learning and helping him to kind of understand and see it from his other, sorry, I have a freight train behind me. So if you hear a train coming through, but we could definitely see this going towards social withdrawal, academic performance, or even truancy. And then we talked about just kind of being labeled as a criminal or labeled as someone who is bad, and how that can precipitate a future of just saying like, well, if you say that I'm this, then I guess I am, so I might as well act out upon it. And that's something we don't want our children to do. So just kind of like being able to look inward, and the responsible people, the grown-ups, the big people, what they can do to make sure that he knows that he doesn't have to take on that word as his identity.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Ashley. Next, we'll go to Desiree Neal.
Hi, everyone. I had a great group. We also really believe that this is the pipeline manifested. We talked about the hypercriminalization due to those assumptions of those external factors without that proof, which is really, really, really sad. But a lot of kids go through it. And then no use of strength-based perspective. I made mention of when I was younger, I had a teacher who took, a student such as DeAndre and would allocate maybe 2 minutes once a week per day. This is the time where you get to be funny. After this time, then your impersonation for the week is over and you can look forward to doing it again next week. But the utilization of a strength-based perspective would have been very helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, Desiree. And Lisa, I seen your hand lowered. Was that something of what you talked about too? I just want to make sure.
Yep, I'm just going to be really brief. We said the same thing everybody else said, but it really speaks to me that the assumptions made about the student's family and neighborhood really allowed some of the staff to maybe work on biases, and we just need to address that right away within our teams.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Lisa. Next, I have Shambra Mulder.
Yes. I was telling them that I'm a school psychologist, and this scenario is very common. And one of the things that I think should have happened here is what we do, a functional behavioral assessment at the beginning to find out what's the function of the initial behavior. And one part of that analysis is an ABC. So when I come in and I observe the behavior, I'm paying attention to what happened before and consequence of the behavior. And those are the two places that we could intervene where well before it becomes sending to the office and going down the whole pipeline. We often overlook the environment and the changes we can make in our environment, as opposed to focusing on a particular student and saying that there's something wrong with this student. He needs an IEP, he needs this intervention, he needs mental health services. Sometimes it's the environment. Oftentimes it's the environment.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Shambra. And Tracy, I see you had your hand raised and then you lowered it. Was this something that your group talked about?
Yeah, most everything that we talked about has been covered by one of the other groups. The only thing that really wasn't is kind of touched on is that implicit bias of automatically seeing him as an angry young Black man in need of juvenile justice services rather than as a kid who was harmed and needed support.
So thank you for sharing that. Emma Alexander. Uh-oh, you're on mute too, but you're saying something really profound. We just can't hear you.
Okay, there it goes.
Yay.
Thank you. In our group, we discussed the things that were said. I think the only additional thing we talked about was restorative justice. Doing something, keeping that child in the school, not having that child taken out of school, out of the classroom, because the child has to be in the school to get trained, to get the learning, not taking them out of the school. So that was something that we really talked about. And culture, understanding the culture, making sure the teachers are trained about different cultures. Just because somebody's funny and loud, that they're not being disrespected. And a teacher can really like to teach, but just teaching them different cultures of students makes a big difference in the classroom. So thank you for that time.
Thank you so much, Emma. Next we have Carolyn.
Yeah, everybody basically said the theme that stood out is the school to prison pipeline. And they all actually well said the same thing, echoing what folks said. But to add, one of the things that we brought in was our school systems are really not designed to meet the unique educational needs, particularly of particular groups of young people. We have an educational system that's based upon a dominant structure, and there's no critical thinking in terms of school. It's about taking in and regurgitating, There are unique learning, and there's research on this about how young men of color socialize and interact in learning. Our school system is not designed, so you look at it as problematic. You also then weaponize Blackness. That's basically what has happened with young people. Our young people are also adulticized from a young age. What he's doing, young white boys get to go, oh, boys will be boys. But young Black males don't have that leverage. But again, I want to emphasize our school system and our teachers are not trained. And we need to move away from that memorizing, have young people be creative and think critically. And that's cultural too, particularly you look at Black communities, that's cultural learning. And so I think he gets bored, he deflects, he wants to be accepted. And so he brings that attention.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's what I had that piece.
Thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. Let's see, Crystal Williams.
Hi. Again, I think we're all saying quite a couple of the same things, but I mean, to be transparent, I was upset about the scenario because we hear this so many times. And that's my normal reaction, like, here we go again. And I've been in the child welfare system for over 30 years. And I still see this in this day and age. And we talk about cultural competencies and all the equity and inclusion and those things, and having teachers trained. And at some point, we've invested a lot of time and energy, but it also goes back to the biases that some folks are showing up to this job with. And once you have to check that and understand. And some of the things that we talked about was, again, a lot of assumptions were made, and at no time was mom or dad even called to say, hey, you know, let's have some conversation, and maybe something could have been going on at home, maybe not. But again, it's just a lot of assumptions that people were bringing to the table because of their own fears and insecurities about the same stereotyping that continues on over years. So, you know, at some point we have to hold our educational environment accountable. And it's not okay that, everyone else around them is getting trained and understanding. It has to be a transfer of learning for them and understanding that your words and your recommendations really impact our, especially our young males of color for a long time. And you have to be very mindful that what are your intentions, quote unquote, is maybe not to be that, but look what the trajectory that we're putting this young man on. And again, just not even bringing the family in to have conversations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Crystal. And we'll go to Darrell and then Daryl. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, Darrell. Thank you so much. Desiree was in my group, and she addressed the prison pipeline issue, and that that type of mindset, that's what fuels that prison pipeline. And the school system, in this case, in this scenario, they failed the young man. Early on, this should have been identified by one of the instructors, and that matter should have been taken to a SAP team, which is like a student assistant program. That's what we do here. I'm a guidance counselor, school counselor, and we get that information. We have a SAP team meeting, and we look at the tiers. And he's definitely gains the attention of a tier 2 because he needs some of those supports in place that can help him thrive. And with myself, I have some students that are kind of fit that mold, and I have them check in with me daily and kind of ask them questions. How was your evening? Did you eat dinner? Were you safe? What's your plan for the day? Do you plan on being a comedian, or you plan on learning? That way to kind of let him know that I'm involved, I'm watching, and then at the end of the day, he'll do a checkout with me. And, how was your day? What did you do wrong? If you did anything wrong, how can we improve? How can we move forward? And, if that had been done, maybe that would have eliminated the ISS incident and all that other stuff. But definitely the school staff is definitely responsible for, yet again, creating another Frankenstein, probably.
Yeah, that's great, Darrell. Darrell, thank you for the work that you're doing in your school, and also that young people have someone that looks like them that they can come and talk to. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that.
And Daryl, I see you had your hand raised and then you lowered, but I just want to make sure you had an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, I really agree with everything everybody else said, and it really touched on a lot of the things that was said in our group as well. But one of the things that we touched on in our group is really thinking about how DeAndre felt. And so internalized, racial oppression happens within a lot of people of color, where we feel a tension when we are in a space that is not accepting of us. And we feel sometimes inferior, or we don't know how to engage. And we don't know how many times he's seen this situation happen where he's been punished and the other person that called him a racial thing was not punished. And so all of this internalization can fuel him saying, I don't know what to do with this energy. So maybe I'll just be funny, right? Maybe I'll just try to, come back on my strengths and use that to survive in a community or in a school that really doesn't accept him. And so thinking more about checking in with like how he would feel internalized, thinking about his trauma, I'm thinking about his own issues that he may be experiencing because not being accepted in the class could be a great step for schools to be really more present, to engage how he's doing. How does he feel like he's really welcome? Does he feel like he's really engaged? And those type of things, because if we don't do that, then he's just considered kind of on the outskirts. He doesn't really know how to engage. He could be having all these internal emotions and he's experiencing this and nobody's really checking in with him. So that's a lot of the parts that we were looking at.
That's wonderful. And thank you for sharing that. I think, unfortunately, it's something that happens a lot. And working in child welfare and case management, that's always the question. When was the last time someone talked to this young person? And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. And so I appreciate you elevating that. It's like, when do we talk to this young person and work alongside them instead of just implementing, here's your punishment for A, B, and C. Beautiful. All right, Jessica, we're gonna call on you and then we'll go to our next activity. Oh, you disappeared from my screen.
Thank you. So something I just wanted to point out, and something, just strikes me is I identify as Indigenous, and something that elders used, tell us is everybody has their medicine, right? We all bring our medicine, and if we're welcome, then we feel welcome with maybe perhaps, a group of students, or maybe even, a student or two, depending on our peers. We might let that part of our personality shine, right? Being goofy, or again, bringing your authentic self, your genuine self, right? And when you see and you connect with other students, right, you're gonna feel comfortable. You might just say, hey, what's going on? Joke around, whatnot. However, if it's looked at with regards to, oh, you need to settle down, or oh, you're being disruptive, or ... right? That actually starts to, and somebody just said, the trauma, people will start to experience, pretty much punishment, because they're bringing their authentic self to spaces where they may feel that they may, only to find out otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. So that's just something that, came to my thought, or to my thoughts, and processing, just coming in with your genuine self, even in workspaces. We have to behave a certain manner in order to meet those systems that were never implemented for folks of color, period. That's what shuts us down, because we have to literally embody those systems that, again, were not built for us. So I just wanted to speak to that. I don't think, and I don't feel that it should be, that a child should not, especially a student, should not have to feel that they cannot bring their authentic self to school. They should feel free to do that, right? And again, It's all about engagement and modalities and how we direct them.
Agreed. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jessica. And I think you bring up a powerful connection, that this also mirrors what happens in the workplace. And I think sometimes we forget that school is that ground where we train young people, like, this is what professionalism is, this is how you behave, and prepare them for the workforce that says, again, this is how you're supposed to act. And in school, you get suspended. At work, like, if you don't fit, you're ostracized or demoted or not promoted or fired. And so there is definitely a connection between the two. Dr. McCoy.
So I just thought there's a conversation going on in the chat asking why we're not also discussing the student who, engaged in the racial slur. And I just thought it was important that we kind of bring that into this conversation. And I want to say, I think obviously that's important, but I think we are not having that conversation here, because what often happens is the person who experiences slur is expected to be resilient while we go fix the other person. Yes. And this is about understanding the trauma and the re-traumatization and recharacterization of criminalizing the behavior for this young Black boy. So often in our society, we should be resilient as the Black people and everybody else gets to be fixed. How about we focus on people should not be resilient? We certainly need to change those other systems, but we also need to recognize and understand the strengths that this young Black boy has and those that he represents, and what we need to do to make sure that he can have a positive outcome and survive. So certainly not to say that we shouldn't think about the consequences that should happen for the person who engaged in the slur, but this conversation is about the racism that exists in our society and how it infiltrates every single system that is supposed to be helpful, that is then not only not helpful for young Black children and other children of color, but that also minimizes and reduces their experiences to nothing. So
can I just clarify? I'm sorry. I'm the one I don't know how to raise my hand. I'm so sorry. Okay. And I want to clarify, because I'm the one who started this conversation. I don't think it should be an either or.
I think this conversation for this hour and a half is not about that young white kid. It's about the Black kid. That's all. So you're right. It should not be an either or at all. It should be a simultaneous conversation. But I think for our time here, we want to talk about what happens when kids of color are in the system and racism prevents them from being seen as they really are, and getting access to what they need so that they can survive, not be resilient. Resilient means we are okay with what society gives us. That's not okay. But we should find out what are the strengths and elevate those so that this young person can get what he needs in order to be successful. So absolutely, I agree with you. It should not be either or.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for for amplifying
Thank you
that.
for
And I
bringing
think,
that up.
yeah, thank you for
Everyone who
bringing that up.
said that, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that forward.
Mhm. And I think I just want to also make sure that everyone knows this is a scenario that we introduced to have a discussion around it. And by all means, like it needs to be addressed. What the other kid did needs to be addressed in a real life scenario. But the purpose of our session today was to introduce this scenario and help us to understand how slippery this slope is. I almost think of it like as a pinball machine where once the kid gets in, they just go from system to system, and how easy it is, just this one scenario that built on just telling funny jokes in the classroom, and how easy it is for this kid to be entered into a juvenile justice system. And now what that does to that young person as an individual, what it does to their family. And so that's why we introduced the scenario and took like a micro portion of the scenario to have a conversation around. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows we are not omitting that or overlooking it or thinking it's okay, but really just taking a portion of it so that we can have an in-depth conversation around how these things that seem to be irrelevant and that seem to be small sometimes create a big impact for families and create a big impact on this young person for the rest of his life. Imagine being in a classroom and telling jokes and being ushered out, and now you're out of class for something that you didn't see a problem with, even that. So if I fight, I get in trouble. If I tell jokes, I get in trouble. Who am I supposed to be as a human being? And how do I navigate this school? And who's there to help me and guide me? So that is the goal of this today. Let me put my screen back up. And time is flying really fast. All right, so someone brought it up, Ashley, I think, brought it up around the power of our thoughts, words, and actions. And that's our goal today, to really think about what's going on. Because it's easy for us, I think, sometimes to look at racism and how it plays out and say, okay, this is what those groups of people do, or this is what happens when you go into this system. But it can impact us all, regardless of our skin color. As a Black person, if I'm not careful and I don't check where my thoughts and my beliefs are coming from, I can be partaking in racism and racist actions as well, and making judgments based on a racist lens that was given to me as a teacher, as a social worker, as a human services worker, as a hospital worker, whatever I'm doing. If I'm not careful and interrogate that, I will start participating in it. And so that is our goal, is getting to the roots of this. Where does this come from? And someone talked about biases earlier, and that is a part of it. Where did that come from? Where did it start taking root? Because the action is the plant, but it comes from somewhere deeper. And so sometimes it comes from privilege. Sometimes it comes from cultural conditioning that we were taught in the school. This is how people behave. And this is how this group of people who live over here, when they behave in that way, that group of people that live in the South Side apartments or in that zip code, that means that they're about to tear things up and we need to nip that in the bud early on. This group of individuals that live over there in that community, they just haven't been taught, they just having a bad day, or they don't know any better, and we just have to teach them and help them learn. And so those are the ways that these things introduce themselves into our workforce, and if we're not careful, into our minds and into our decision making. And sometimes it's just ignorant. Somebody told us a story and we just took it and ran with it. Like one time there was a student back in 1982 and they acted like this in school and they were over from that zip code. Now, everyone from 1982 to 2023 from that zip code has been attached with that label. Oppression. People that have been oppressed in the past and are really trying to take their power back, and it shows up in different ways, maintaining the status quo. That's what people here do. That's how we've always done it, and you just follow along with it. Religion, racism and white supremacy, fear, power, again, overgeneralizations, affirmation. A lot of times people that participate in this are the ones that get promoted, are the ones that get the Teacher of the Year award, and so it's reinforced. And so it's up to us to interrogate that and to not just look at racism and white supremacy, but look at all the other ways that it shows up. How does it show up on TV and what we watch? Who are the kids that are going to jail on the shows that we're watching? Who are they talking about on the podcast or in our Facebook group, in our prayer meeting? Who are we always praying for at church? Who's in the prayer box and whose son or daughter is getting locked up? And so the message keeps replaying. But we have to pull up and ask ourselves, in what ways does this emotion serve me, or this belief or this action serve me? And also, where did it come from? And am I ready to change it? And so consistently, and it's every day in every decision, regardless of our race, really looking at how we're making our decisions and what they're based on. And so one of my favorite models that I really like for this is called the pause model. And this is the overview of the pause model. And I like it because pause actually means to stop and to think. But actually the words and the letters mean something. And so the P is pay attention to what's actually happening beneath our judgments and assessments. So for example, if I'm a social worker and they send me over to the South Side, and every time they say you have to go to the South Side, my hands start sweating, my heart starts beating fast. What is that about? Like, what is happening? Why do I feel nervous all of a sudden? Why do I feel like I need to go get my tennis shoes out of the car just in case I have to run? What is that, and where does that come from? And again, looking not only at the surface level, but looking beneath the roots. Where did I learn to fear this area? And so that moves us into the A, acknowledging our own thoughts and emotions. What is beneath my fast heart rate? What is beneath my sweaty hands? Like, am I afraid? Am I feeling threatened? Like, what's going on? Am I nervous? Do I really not want to go? And then our U is understanding options for other possible reactions and interpretations. So what are some other things that can happen on the South Side? They may be doing a festival over there today. There may be a family who actually wants my help. And maybe we've misjudged them, and they're actually great families that live in the South Side and they're thriving. And I have an opportunity to learn something different, to learn something that was not taught at work, to disrupt a bias or stereotype about that area. And then our S is searching for the most empowering and productive way to handle the situation. So either I can show up and like, listen, I just need y'all to sign these papers. I'm trying to hurry up and get in and get out of here, or I can take time to really sit and understand this family. But we have to understand how we're entering. If I come in and I'm scared and I really don't want to be there, or I feel like the individuals who live in this particular neighborhood are not going to do anything with their lives, or they're not worth my time, I'm going to show up like that. But if I show up with the thought of like, I don't even know these people, like I'm coming to learn, I'm coming to find out how I can help, I'm coming to find out how life is for them, and what are they successful in, what are some of the barriers, and how can I connect with them or provide them some resources, I'm going to come in a whole different stance. I'm going to come with a completely different mindset. So when I search for the most empowering and productive way to handle the situation, I'm going to give them a chance. I'm not going to go in afraid. I'm going to go in open and curious, and then I'm going to behave in that way. So that's where the E comes in, and it acts your plan. So if we look at this from DeAndre's scenario, and we come and we look at the P, what judgments are being made about DeAndre, his family, and community? And if someone would like to raise their hand and share with like one for each one. And you can also share in the chat too. Alvin?
Yeah, so, okay, so what I want to say, what I want to clear up something is, and in the chat, what I'm saying is that the school system, not what we're doing right now, the school system tend to bypass the cause and just focus on the Black child, let's say. So the judgment that's being made is that, like I shared, you know, I come from Miami, Florida, Overtown. Now, for those who don't know, Overtown original name was Color Town. So all Black folks that, well, I'm old, I'm 66. So all Black folks that came from Miami, Florida at that time was Overtown. And then we migrated. So the point that I'm trying to make is that real simple. They prejudge. They look at your skin and they make the judgment. They don't even address the white kid. I'm going to say white kid, the cause. I mean, the guy stepped on his foot, let her, you know? Yeah, so I'm gonna calm down.
Thank you, Alvin.
Great
Yes.
conversation. Love it. Love it.
Thank you. And again, we know that this hits close for a lot of us. And that is the role, I think, for us as a facilitator, to make sure that we're not just doing these hypothetical play Disneyland-ish scenarios, but it's real stuff, because in that way we can work through this and we can see the intersections of how we can take a different approach to this. But if we create something that's hypothetical and just feeling good, that we can't move forward like that. And so that is the reason that we like to do scenarios and create real scenarios around. And this is actually a fictitious scenario, but it hinders on real life. And so we want to make sure that it feels real. Keisha.
Yes, so what judgments are being made that he's a bad kid from a bad home. And a lot of times I'm a JPO, I work for juvenile justice, and this starts even with the police pulling the kids over or stopping them. We've had kids stopped for walking on the wrong side of the road because we know that family, so they must have something on them. They can't be up to anything good, you know. It's dark outside, you know, and sometimes that is true. But honestly, they have no reason to even stop these kids in the first place or search them.
Thank you for sharing that. Wow. And that begins a cycle of like, oh, there's so-and-so. I just stopped them the other week and now they're back out here again. And we see the trajectory of that young person's life change again. Dawn.
I was going to say they're assuming that he's not getting his needs met at home. That because they just said mom just had another baby and she's struggling. How do they know she's struggling? They don't know anything about the support system and about the family. So the main assumption was that his needs aren't being met. He's being ignored at home. So
yeah,
they don't know anything. They haven't even talked to a parent this whole scenario.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
They said mom. They didn't mention dad.
Right.
I wanted to say that too. So they're discounting the family and into family for them. So
yes. Yes. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you all. Our next is A. So what thoughts and emotions does this bring up for these school personnel? And what are the roots of those emotions? So Yolanda.
Hey, so for the A, we have these schools who believe in inclusion. So they say, and if you don't, please excuse me, they're cutting grass outside. What I'm seeing here is that they are judging the area where the child lives instead of looking at what P was. What was really happening for P was like, what is really happening? Well, let's be factual. He was telling jokes in school, in class. The teacher got aggravated and wanted to put him out. He didn't know why, because it's probably the first time he got put out for telling jokes, because he normally settles down by himself. And so what they're looking at is, okay, he's from that side of town, and his mama got a whole bunch of kids, not saying so much, and the father's not there, when they really haven't talked to or even thought about going over to the family house, asking mom to come over, asking dad to come over, asking for support to come over, because you just never know what's really going on. And so instead of having preventions in place or interventions in place, we're just going to go ahead and say what we think it is and call it real and call it gospel and call it truth. So that's their truth. And it comes from, like you said before, back in 1982, a kid from this zip code did this, and this is how they act over there. And so that's where it's coming from. So I was a school teacher in Baltimore, Maryland, in the inner city. And there was this woman who had to come over to the city from, I think it was Fredericks. And she actually said, I was terrified to know that I had to go into the city. I said, why is that? And she was like, it's just so much that's going over there. But she really didn't want to say because I was a woman of color. And so I was like, oh, I go over there all the time, but I'm not from there. I don't live there. But hey, it's not a problem for me. So she was like, but it wouldn't be a problem for you. And so what we do is we hear on the news, on the media about what's going on over there. And we think it's going on over there all the time. When prominent people actually lived in Baltimore City, they would not go into Baltimore County because they were born and raised in the city and they love the city. So instead of just focusing on what you heard on television, talk to people, go out and get culturally aware. So in our aid, we're talking about people who heard what goes on over there or the type of people that live over there without really experiencing over there. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Yolanda. And I also want to make sure that when we think about the A, we really look at the emotions, because we know what emotions come from this. Like this young man is about to be out of control and no one in the school is going to be able to do anything for him. So we're afraid, and we know whether fear is real or it's made up. When fear, the label of fear or feared, gets attached to a Black person, it goes on from there. Like it's going down. Like now we're afraid of him and we don't know because he lives over there in that address. And that helps to substantiate a case of like, this young person needs to be in an anger management class or needs to be in this juvenile justice program, and everyone goes along with it because, wow, if you're afraid, then maybe we should be afraid about something. And so continuing to really make sure that we understand what emotions, what are people saying, even in their silence, what is being insinuated, even if it's not being said. This is a little scary Black boy that may grow up and be a scary Black man. And so we got to do something about this before it gets out of control. Let's move to the U because we are running short on time. What are the possible options for responding to DeAndre? And Carolyn, I see your hand raised if you would like to respond to the U. Uh-oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, no, I was going to make an overall, just general comment, and I think it may fall into how we respond to this. I think we have to, what strikes me here is the amount of systems that then become involved with this family, which I'm not quite sure is productive. And so we do have to find alternate ways. Like, I mean, I have my issues with child welfare and the overrepresentation of Black and brown families within that system. You know, no offense to anyone who works in child welfare, but it is problematic. And that then becomes really, you know, folks think they're going in to help, families feel over-policed, and from the criminal legal system as well. I do believe that different type of supports need to be set up within community-based structures where you have people from the community who are familiar with the family, the culture, and everything to be able to go in and assist with these. And there is where our resources need to be within our communities, build within, where people feel safe. We know traditionally and culturally, especially BIPOC communities, they talk about extended families. What is the extended family and community that plays a role? So I just want to say interventions, we should minimize child welfare and criminal legal systems. I call child welfare family regulation systems. I'm sorry. That's my term for it. I really have strong feelings about the child welfare. I'm a Dorothy Roberts fan. Y'all know who Dorothy Roberts is.
Thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. Thank you for sharing that. And I think you bring up a great point around this too, is that a lot of times it creates an adversarial relationship with families. And so when we look at and we're working in mental health, and I've worked in systems where we were there to help, and the question, well, this parent just called and now this kid, that they're out of control and they're 16 and we have to go and place them somewhere. And everybody's like, Well, this happened based on the mother's feedback. This started happening when they're around 7 or 8 or 9 years old. Why didn't she reach out for help before? Because of this. So if this is their first interaction with the system that is criminalizing and penalizing the son for making jokes in front of the class, now when they really need help, they're going to remember this experience and they're not going to call. And so we're going to see them when they need really, really intensive services, and it makes it hard to do the intervention and to even get beyond that and do prevention with families. If we look at the family and the individuals within that family, whether through a school lens or through social services or human services, as being what do I want to say? I'm going to say being demonic, but also just looking at them from a lens of like justice, and that we need to help them and fix them, and we need to make their behavior better before they get out of control. Okay, so the S, and we'll move through this since we're running close on time. So the S is which option would be most productive, positive, and empowering. And I think we kind of discussed that today of some other options and some other ways of looking at this. How do we get the community involved? How do we connect this young man, maybe to someone from Big Brothers Big Sisters or to Boys and Girls Club? We have a Boys and Girls Club Center here that has a theatrical aspect to it, and maybe that's a good connection. But how do we look at other sources other than sources that are going to punish and penalize and criminalize this young man and his family? And also the E, how can they proceed based on this option? And so again, we talked about other ways that we can connect this family in their community. And the impact of it is that this young person would be allowed to thrive, that they would not have a criminal justice or juvenile justice involved interaction on their record, because we know what happens with that. This young person is in 6th grade, and if this goes down the way it's written, when they go to high school, that record follows them. DeAndre, be careful, be violent, and he had anger management. He's been involved in the juvenile justice system. And now those teachers, before even getting to meet him, have formed an idea about who this person is, and they're ready to respond. You don't get to go to the office 3 times and get in-school suspension. You go the first time and you get sent home because we already read about you and we know what you're doing, and that's too scary to have in this school. And so just being mindful of that. All right, so we know this session has been quick and short today, and we could go on talking about this forever, but unfortunately we do have to adhere to time, and we want to honor your time today. So we're going to do something that we call a chatterfall. And we're going to have you type something in the chat box and not press enter until we say press enter. So in the chat box, we're asking you to share one action that you can and will take within the next 7 days related to this topic. So I'll give you a few minutes to put that in the chat, and do not press enter yet. All right, so on the count of 3, we are going to press enter. So 1, 2, 3. And this is our chatterfall. So we have talking to their sons, someone will be talking to their son's administration, pause and interrogate your assumptions, share your learnings with others who are working with young people, discuss with colleagues what they can do to implement the pause approach in the systems they work in. Thank you so much for sharing this. As a mental health advocate, I will observe more keenly. Absolutely. And again, remembering that we're talking about racism, and it's easy for us to think that we are beyond it or not participating in it, but it's just those little decisions. Those, we used to call them seemingly irrelevant decisions, things that we make decisions on, feelings that come up for us in certain circumstances that show that we are constantly being pushing up against racism, pushing up against oppression, and pushing up against things that may send a family down the wrong path instead of stopping and intervening and giving them something that's more uplifting. And so just being mindful of that is extremely important. Thank you all so much. All right, So this is a special opportunity that we are sharing with each of you today as a token of our appreciation for you being here. So we have a special opportunity. If you're ready to take action, we have created what we call Learn, Act, and Change cohort. And so we have 3 cohorts that will revolve around racism and youth mental health. This same topic, we're going to spend a few more hours on it and really dig deeper in this. We're going to create small cohorts. So on June 29th, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., we have one for school mental health staff. July 6th, we're going to have one for peer support, mental health providers, and juvenile justice staff. And on July 20th, we want to host one with administrators, executive directors, CEOs, COOs, and HR staff. And we put that one last intentionally because we want to take the things that come up in our previous 2 series to really explore with the CEOs and executive directors who are making decisions within these organizations on things that they can do to improve the outcomes and to provide better support to the staff. And so we will send out this link to everyone who participated today. Again, if you're interested, please make sure that you apply as soon as possible. A small cohort, and it will close quickly. All right, so we're going to open it up. We have we have 3 minutes for any questions or comments. And again, at the end of the session, you'll receive a link to the recording. You'll also receive a certificate of completion, and you'll receive a copy of the slide deck. And again, stay connected with us for upcoming events. For archive recordings, you can go to our INTACT website. You can also follow us and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And if you're not already registered, we have a summit, System of Care Summit coming up that is free of charge. It is powerful. It's going to be packed with great sessions, and we encourage you to go to our website if you have not already done so and register for that. Lastly, your feedback is important to us. This is a part of our funding and a part of making sure that we're doing what we say we're going to do, but also making sure that we answer questions or any trends that are coming up for you in your work. So you will receive a survey after this session. Please let us know how this experience was for you. Please let us know if there are things or topics that you would like for us to touch on in the future. We're always happy to receive all feedback. So please make sure you take time for that. And I will stop sharing my screen. Yes, Don, I agree. We've done this longer. So thank you all. If anyone has any questions, we'll be here for a few more minutes to answer any questions that you may have. But in the interim, hopefully we see you again in the upcoming Learn, Act, Change series. And we just want to thank you again for your time, for your participation, and for just being present with us to talk about this critical topic today. And be safe and be well.
Thank you, everyone, for attending and your feedback and support.